Hi folks, and thanks for checking out I Suck at Painting. So, orcs. There are many different variations on the colors of orc flesh, from basic greens to browns, blues, grays. And for as many different color variations there are just as many different ways to paint them. So today we are going to be using contrast paints and a couple regular paints and washes to make like a light, earthy, browny, greeny sort of orc flesh. So if this is something that you like, make sure you subscribe for more. Right, orc skin and contrast paints. So contrast paints have been marketed as one thick coat and done, and you can certainly do that, but a lot of times it just really doesn't look that great. So what we're going to do today is some sort of thick coats, but we'll take some steps after that to make it look a lot better. Full disclosure, we won't be using only contrast paints. We'll be using some other things as well, but the three contrasts we will be using are Skeleton Horde, Militarum Green, and Orc Flesh. In addition, we'll also be using Scarsnick Green, Nurgling Green, and our two glazes and washes are going to be Waywatcher Green and Estonian Camo shade. So this effect is going to give us a kind of a little bit lighter, earthy kind of green. This is what we should end up with at the end. This is just using an arm I did the old metal video from. I'll link to that up top. And this is what we should have when we're done. It's not exactly fast, but it is easy. So let's get started. Okay, so our first step is Skeleton Horde. We're just going to take this right out of the pot. We're not going to thin it down or anything. We don't want tons, but we do want coverage, and we want to kind of guide it down into the recesses, trying not to let it stay up on the raised edges too much. If you start to see any pooling, just pull it away. We do want to keep this paint moving, but this is very simple. So if we get some pooling like this is a little bit much, we'll just pull that off here with the hand. This is going to be covered, but this is also going to affect the color a little bit. If you see any spots you don't like, just pull it away. Alright, that looks pretty good, so we will get the dry on this. Okay, we're back after letting that Skeleton Horde dry. And this is where we're at with that. So our next part is the green. And what I have here is 2 parts Militarum Green, 1 part Orc Flesh, and a little bit of medium, just to thin it out a tiny bit. And we're pretty much going to do the same thing. We want coverage, but we don't want pooling. And sorry about the focus issues in that first part. We'll try to make sure that doesn't happen again. So we're just going to apply this just like we would any other contrast paint. And we want to keep it moving. and try to pull up any pools as we see them. If you miss any spots, go ahead and hit them real quick before the contrast paint gets too dry, or it's going to look weird. I'm sorry. If you're new to the channel, I must apologize for all the background noise. Less than 50 meters away, I have an 8-lane national highway. Runs all the way from the north to the south of Taiwan, and it can get quite loud. And when it gets to a state that you like, go ahead and let it dry. So I think that's good for now. We'll let this dry and we'll come back and do the next steps. Okay, with our green contrast paint dry, time to move on to our next step, which is going to be Scarsnick Green. And we're going to dry brush this. So we don't need a palette or anything, we'll just go straight from the pot. I'm going to use this medium makeup brush for this. Now when we do this, we kind of want to start keeping in mind where our light source is. So I'm going to assume that his arm is going to be like this on the model. So we're going to try to keep our Scarsnick Green at the top of these surfaces. And we do this just like any other dry brushing. Get some paint on your brush, pull most of it off, and just start hitting it softly. We're going to concentrate on the tops. Don't push real hard so that it gets into the recesses. Just want to do this very gently. So at this point it still doesn't look real great, but in the end it will. So I will go ahead and continue on with this step and come back when this is finished. Okay, so we're done with that part. This is where we're at now. And our next step is another dry brush. This time we're going to use the Nurgling Green. This is a dry paint. So again, just straight from the pot with this. And we're just going to do the same thing again. This time we're using a smaller makeup brush. And we're going to go a little more conservatively with this one. We're just going to hit this one very lightly on the tops of the surfaces. This is going to give a little kind of a tan kind of feeling to it. It's a little bit more browny than the Scarsnick Green. Alright, so I'll continue on with this and I'll come back when this is finished. Okay, so our next step, we're going to go back to our contrast paint. I just added a little bit of medium and I did this because we want to use our contrast paint now sort of as a glaze. And this is really one of our last things that we have to do. And we're going to use this glaze sort of contrast just to add some transitions from our dry brush to our original contrast paint. Now I'm going to be doing some more Contrast Paint Ork Flesh videos, some different color variations, so make sure you subscribe, catch those. There's so many different ways to do orc skin, but I found this is a pretty enjoyable way to do it. So what we're going to do now is just get our contrast paint glaze, and we're going to start hitting the shadow side of these muscles and just kind of trying to get a gradient. Can go a couple times. You just want to bring a little bit of this contrast back. So what we want to do is pull toward the shadow side. We'll come back in again and do it a second time, just in a smaller area to smooth out these gradients. So like I said, this isn't exactly fast like you would expect from contrast paint stuff, but it is pretty easy and it is quite effective. So I'll carry on with this and come back when that is finished, and we'll go on to the final step. Alright, so we're ready for the final step, which consists of two parts. It's going to be our glaze and our shade. So, first, we're going to do our glaze of Way Watcher. And this we want to do nice and thin. We don't want pooling. We don't want it to settle in the recesses. We just want to tint the color, get it nice and thin and uniform all around. So be very careful of letting it settle in recesses, so it'll look weird if it dries like that. This is basically just going to pull all of our colors together. And smooth out those transitions that we made with the contrast glaze. There's really nothing to this, just put it on nice and thin. And after that, we will go on to Estonian Camo shade. And this is also very easy. We're just simply going to use that to define any of the shadows that we want to be darker than the rest. Alright, we'll let that dry, then we'll do these shadows. And we come to our very last step, and this is Estonian Camel shade, and we're just gonna pin wash this into the spots that we want to be darker. For me, that's going to be the tops of the arms, the shadow sections here. Just to separate these muscles a little bit more. Okay. Drop some down in here. Underneath the hand, where most of the shadow is going to be here. And we're just kind of using this like a glaze too in some spots. Some spots it's like a pin wash. And get between his fingers. And inside the palm and the heel of his hand, define those creases just a little bit. So that's basically it. It's not your typical contrast one thick coat, and it does take a bit longer, but I think the results are good. It's something different than you see from a lot of other orc flesh, and yeah, I think it's pretty cool. Again, I will be doing more of these. I will also link to this old metal video in the description. And if you found this interesting and helpful, you can go downstairs and do all the things, like, subscribe, share, tell your dog.
I am your Hawks, and I blame society.